Hello, this is a Nice Wander of the Nowman Show, and I'm here with author and speaker Charles Eisenstein, who is the author of the books Sacred Economics, The Ascent of Humanity, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, and The Yoga of Eating.
That was a long time ago. Yeah.
A long time ago, yeah. Well, it's all part of the repertoire there. He's also an essayist. He has a blog called New and Ancient Story. He's recorded many videos on a variety of subject matter, including a TED Talk. Charles Eisenstein, thank you very much for being on the Nowman Show.
Thanks.
Now.
The ego isn't the fundamental problem. The problem is the story of self that runs our culture. And you could say that the problem is that the ego has taken over many other functions that do not properly belong to the ego. So the story of self that I'm talking about answers the question, who are you? And it says you are a separate individual among other separate individuals competing to survive in a world of other, in a world of forces and masses bouncing around according to mathematical laws. And therefore your well-being comes through dominating and controlling the competitors and the impersonal forces outside of you. We've built a whole civilization on that. We've built an economy on that. And we have an experience of being that is informed by that story. That's a story that's breaking down. It's no longer working. The institutions built on it are no longer working. And we are in transition now. As that story falls apart and we move into a new and ancient story of interconnection, interdependence, interbeing, where we know that we're not separate, where we know that everything that we do to nature we're doing to ourselves, that anything that's happening on this planet will inevitably come back to us, no matter how high a wall we build. That domestic violence mirrors foreign policy violence, et cetera, et cetera. Well, as we understand that and build new institutions on that understanding, the whole world will change. So we are in a revolution on every level. Not only are we seeing the old institutions fail us and begin to disintegrate, but also our understanding of who we are, that's disintegrating too. And so we're entering this, I call it the space between stories, where we just don't have answers anymore. We just don't know anymore. We're not sure who we are, what's real, how to navigate our lives, what's normal. And eventually we go through that emergent space, and on an individual level too. A lot of people are going through this as the institutions of their lives, their marriage, their career, their health fall apart. People are going through a parallel transition. And I think we're just in the early stages of this passageway, this initiation as individuals and as a species. So sometimes we catch glimpses of what the future could look like, sometimes. And that's one of the things I write about. What would an economy of interbeing look like? Not that someone's going to read my book and say, oh yes, that's very clever, let's implement that right now. I'm not going to change the minds of the people who are governed by the ruling institutions, the prime ministers and people like that. They're not even going to read the book for the most part. Or if they do, it'll be like their alter ego, in their time off. but as far as what they can do in their positions of power, no way.
Yes.
But still, like I and many, many other people who are doing the things that we call alternative and holistic and so forth, we're kind of planting seeds that will germinate in the detritus of the breakdown that is underway.
And that's currently what your present project is called, the Space Between Stories. It's like an online course.
That's starting in a couple weeks, and it's it's for people who are in that space where the old meanings, the old identities, who am I, what's real, what's important in life, how do I live a life, like those aren't working anymore. and the new ones maybe haven't arrived, or maybe you're just starting to be in a new story, but it's still fragile. Or maybe you're still in an old story, but you can see that its days are numbered.
Well, I do a lot of social networking and connect with people online and in person a lot. And as I mentioned earlier, I see a lot of people coming from different backgrounds, and they're getting to these similar or even exactly the same conclusions about this kind of thing. Like I connected with a guy that works in the aerospace recently that does a seminar on in thinking together. And of course he comes mostly from a business perspective, but it's the same kind of thing, to get people to come together and think about their thinking. You know, and in essence it's different than what you or I might be looking at, but it's also coming to the same conclusion, that we really are interdependent and our being is all connected, I feel personally, through consciousness. You know, we have a universal consciousness. You know, Nowman comes from universal consciousness. Yeah. You know, and there's also this global awareness, you know, that we are connected. We're no longer, because of the internet, we are not isolated really from each other anymore. We can connect if we want to. The resources are there. And I have a lot of hope. I think there's a lot of solutions if we focus on that. If we are paying attention to what's going on within ourselves. And I feel like I've had at least a half a dozen what I like to call worldview changes. And yes, there were personal tragedies and economic challenges, but also cultural experiences. I taught English in Japan, and I have to tell you, that totally transformed so much of my life and how I viewed culture and the world, you know, and people and myself in that. So, and you know, being a musician and in front of an audience, and feeling that energy of, you know, together we're enjoying this experience. There's no words to describe the feeling that creates. Yeah. And in this project, what is your particular goal? First of all, what's the motivation that you had in creating this, and how do you see this project moving forward?
Well, one motivation is just that there seemed to be a big demand for, you know, a deeper, more experiential exploration of these ideas. And I mean, I lead retreats sometimes and give, you know, workshops and things like that, but that's, you know, maybe, I mean, I have to travel somewhere, it's a limited number of people. So I thought, well, yeah, maybe I can do it online and create. I mean, I think there's something about in-person experiences that you cannot capture over the internet.
Absolutely.
But sometimes I get the feeling like of a real connection, even when I'm doing a Skype lecture too, where I can feel the audience as a collective being, you know.
Yes.
So in part, this is an experiment. And also, I've never done one before, so, you know, is there a real call for it? And there's been a really huge response.
That's awesome.
So I'm just going with that.
I'm hoping all the best for you in that. I want to have a couple more things, ask you I do have a segment I call The Question.
All right.
Before I get to that though, is there anything that you would like to say in closing? I know you have a website, which is charleseisenstein.net. That's Charles, of course, EISENSTEIN.net. So anything you need to know also about space between stories and sacred economics and all your essays and books and videos, you can find everything there. It's pretty extensive. The question that I have, I think we need a new renaissance. What do you recommend that we do together to help make the world a better place?
I don't think that the problem is not knowing what to do together. I think everybody knows on some level what to do, but maybe they're not ready to do it. I'm not going to be able to say, Dan, I know better than you what choice you should make in your life. You know, you should, you know, drive a biodiesel car, or you should move to the countryside and plant, a permaculture farm or something like that. Or you should devote your life to social justice or prison reform or saving the sea turtles. That's the most important thing. Or racial healing. All of this work is important. I think it's more a matter of how do we open to the next step, the next unfolding of our desire to serve. Perhaps this isn't something that you can heroically achieve by trying harder. I find that I have certain experiences that open me up, that make the things that were too scary to do before within the bounds of my courage now. Or I'll hear a message that resonates with me. Perhaps for some people that message is that, and this is related to the gift actually, that you have a gift, and the most important thing you can do in your life is to express that gift. And that even if your rational mind can't say how it's going to transform our planet, your particular expression of your gift, how it's going to transform the planet, there's a piece of you that knows that everything you do is important, that every act has cosmic significance, and that all you need to do is to trust that feeling of significance, to be guided by what's beautiful to you, what feels meaningful, even if it's invisible to the larger world. Because I think we're all actually being orchestrated by an intelligence beyond our understanding that deploys each of us to do the work that's necessary, that invites each of us to do the work that's necessary. And the form that invitation takes is our feeling of fulfillment and excitement in engaging that work. So that's what we need to be guided by.
That's fantastic. Charles, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Charles Eisenstein. This is Nice Wander, and you're tuning in to the Nowman Show.
Sometimes people ask me how I'm able to stay optimistic, or how I'm able to stay grounded in what I call the new story. And it's really because I'm held there. If it weren't for this support that I'm getting, this effusive support, I think I would be where I was years ago, struggling for air, coming up once in a while, breaking the surface of the water once in a while, and seeing this glorious sunlit realm of what's possible and who I could be, and then getting sucked back underneath again and just clawing for air. Part of the old story, as I will call it, even though it's not actually as old as the new story, which is also a very ancient story, part of the old story would be, the expert coming in, diagnosing the situation, laying out a plan, and then telling you what to do. This revolution is fundamentally not like that. It's not one where the vanguard, is out there in front. What is this revolution anyway? Different people have different views of it. Some people would say it's a revolution in consciousness or a revolution of love. And does that mean that the leaders of it are more conscious than everybody else? We form organizations and notice in our organizations and in our personal lives the same kinds of issues that we see outside of ourselves are arising. And we think, if my own organization can't avoid whatever, horizontal bullying or the marginalization of dissenting views, and if we can't get along, what's to stop us from creating the same kind of world when we get into power in the unlikely event that would happen? And so this is bringing up, I think, for a lot of people, a convergence of activism and spirituality. And I'm not going to say that this is anything new. There's a very long tradition of religious people doing social activism. There's also been this kind of cynicism among activists that kind of would disparage spirituality or anything unscientific as a distraction, a diversion, or an opiate that siphons energy away from actual change. It sure seemed like that in the 80s, when the radicalism and the idealism of the 60s and 70s that had gone into the anti-war movement, into the environmental movement, seemed to turn inward, and it became all about personal growth. And the progress that had been made stalled and then even reversed. In the 60s and 70s, we had the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, for example, and it looked like things were going pretty well. And then we had, following the age of Aquarius, we had the age of Ronald Reagan, who was saying, trees make more pollution than people do. We don't have to worry about it. If you've seen one redwood, you've seen them all. I had some help from my father, particularly, who gave me books like Silent Spring in 1984 and A People's History of the United States that validated my feeling of a wrongness in the world, that said, no, you're not crazy. There's something you're not being told underneath the veneer of normalcy. What's important in life? And these answers are changing today. The old answers don't make sense anymore. But we live among institutions that are built on these old answers. So I didn't realize this right away, but what happened when I went to Taiwan, after I left school, I had experiences that didn't fit into the reality that I had grown up with, into what I thought was, into beliefs that I thought were not just beliefs, I thought they were truth itself. I was, very scientific, very rational, studied mathematics and philosophy, analytic philosophy. And so I thought I knew how the universe worked. I was also, somewhat radicalized politically. I understood about globalism, and colonialism and imperialism. I was, aware of all that stuff. I read Noam Chomsky. But then I had experiences that completely violated what I had accepted to be real. And these happened through Chinese medicine, through Taoist shamanism, through psychedelics, just through Qigong, practices like that. They're all part of a seismic shift in our narratives. One by one, on their own, each of those would seem a reasonable explanation, but in totality, I realized that what I was doing was I was mimicking economic imperialism, which says, we know how to live better than you do. I was familiar with this, that Western institutions would go around the world saying, what you need to develop. And by the way, when we call somebody developing and we call ourselves developed, we are assuming that their destination is to be like us. And so here's what you need to do. You need to convert your economy into an export commodity economy. You need to build a centralized infrastructure. You need to accept mega loans for mega projects, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you can become like us. So you can have roads and cars and schools and airports and everything like that, and a consumer economy, because we are living in the best way possible because we're the most advanced. Like, that was part of our story, and that's part of a deeper story that I call the Ascent of Humanity, that says that we originated as helpless, primitive beings, barely surviving, struggling to survive, living lives that were nasty, brutish, and short. But thanks to technology and civilization and laws and all of these things and science, we've ascended above that downtrodden, benighted state into the realm of civilization and reason, and we are conquering nature, and someday our triumph will be complete and we will reach the stars, and we will no longer need nature anymore. We will synthesize our food. We will upload our consciousness into computers. We will have robot servants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like this was one of the deep stories that told us who we were and what our purpose on earth was, to become its lords and masters. So the story of development rests on top of this deeper story that is part of our mythology. And I recognized that, and I'm like, well, how am I doing any different with my epistemological imperialism, with my imperialism of not only do we know how to live better than you, but we know how to know better than you. Our knowledge is superior to yours, and our ways of acquiring knowledge are superior to yours. We understand reality better than you do. And it's not like I, ceased becoming a scientist. It's not like I abandoned the scientific method. But I began to realize that the scientific method itself rests on unexamined metaphysical premises about the nature of reality, and that science is very much a cultural institution that encodes the same biases as, on a deep level, as our economic institutions, and that they're inextricably linked. And so I just kind of got more and more deeply radicalized. And I think that's happening to more and more people as the dominant stories fall apart. This breakdown is inevitable on a personal level, as it also happens on a collective level. So as the healthcare system or the educational system or the economic system falls apart, it generates crises that visit, or especially the ecosystem. It generates crises that invade our personal lives inescapably. The old story says that there is no limit to our ability to insulate ourselves from what's happening out there. Because the old story says we are separate from what's out there. I call it the story of separation. We are separate individuals in a world of other. I'm separate from you, and we're all separate from the world outside of ourselves. Maybe dependent on it conditionally, but not existentially. What happens to the rainforest, that's the rainforest. It's not happening to us. What happens to the sea turtles or the horned owls or whatever, it doesn't happen. It need not affect us if we are clever enough to come up with a substitute. The demise of the pollinators, of the honeybees, that need not affect us if we can have hydroponics and artificial pollination and maybe someday synthesize our food. We don't need the pollinators. We are the masters of the universe, or we are ascending toward that. That was what the old story told us. And what we do to other beings, other people, we do to ourselves. That military violence, no matter how high a security fence we build around ourselves, it's going to be mirrored as domestic violence. That we're learning that we're not separate, really. And we're entering, in the breakdown of this old story, we're entering, well, first a space between stories, and from that space emerges the new and ancient story that you could call interbeing. So, and interbeing simply says what I was just saying, that it answers these basic questions differently. Who are you? Old story, a separate self in a world of other, a bubble of psychology, a soul inside a flesh body and separate from that. A biological machine programmed by your DNA. Those are all essentially the same answer. That's the old story. The new story says, who are you? You are the totality of all of the relationships of that separate self. You are relationship, or you are a mirror of everything. In the old story, well-being comes through control, because there are these competing others out there, and there are these hostile forces of nature, or at least indifferent to your well-being, random forces of nature. So if you want to be safe and secure and and you want to thrive, you have to protect yourself from those competitors and from those indifferent forces. So that's also built into the story. And you can see how our economic system mirrors that story. Our economic system separates us from each other, makes it seem that what happens to you need not affect me. In fact, your misfortune can be my good fortune, because now that's one less competitor for the job, for the money, which is different from, okay, so that's just one example of how our institutions, and it's not just a money institution, it's medicine, education, politics, technology, in different ways, all of them are built on the story of separation, the story of control, the story of scarcity. And our consciousness now is moving toward a new story. In the story of interbeing, well-being does not come through control, and your fundamental motivation is no longer to maximize rational self-interest or reproductive self-interest. Because if you're not separate from me, then your well-being is identical to my well-being, or connected to my well-being. Therefore, to be generous, to be altruistic, isn't actually altruistic. It would be like saying, like, suppose I'm going to be really nice to my liver. Is that altruistic? I'm making such sacrifices to be nice to my liver. Well, no, because I understand my liver is part of me. And when we understand that we're not separate from other people, from people in other countries, from other species, from ecosystems, from the rainforest, then of course we want to serve and protect those beings. Of course we want to be generous. The solution is to bring people, to bring each other into the story of interbeing. Because from that story, our love of life operates naturally. This revolution is a collective revolution. It's not the expert. It's not the awakened one leading the rest of us. We all hold each other in the new story. We all practice the song together. And that's why I'm here preaching to the choir. Thank you.
On camera, I'd like to quickly thank Autumn from the Aurora Cycle Network of Time Banks and also Pasadena Transition, Marie, she's your primary plate thrower, right? Or was it?
Chief plate spinner.
Chief, I like
title.
that. Chief plate spinner, I like that.
Yeah.
And also Janine from the Armory Center for the Arts. Thank you so much for setting this up.